My name is Olivia, but people call me Ollie, and I'm 32. I never imagined that the person I trusted most could betray me so completely. Just 3 days ago, I handed him the keys to my house, my sanctuary, my safe place, thinking he'd handle a small favor for me. Instead, he waltzed in like he owned the place, treating every corner as if it belonged to him, laughing at my trust while signing papers I didn't even know existed. That old brass key in my hand, the one I've cherished for years, suddenly felt heavier than lead. Something in his smirk, the way he avoided my gaze, whispered that this was only the beginning. I froze, unable to speak, heart pounding, watching him take what I had built. You won't believe what happened next, so stick around, honey, hit subscribe, and hear the story that changed everything. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and for better or worse, I learned early on that trust was rare. My parents were quiet, hard-working people who taught me to value honesty and diligence above all else. They owned a modest home, a little brick-and-mortar haven that smelled of old wood and fresh paint whenever they fixed it up. I remember my father polishing the brass doorknob every Saturday morning, my mother humming softly in the kitchen, the sunlight catching the framed photos lining the hallway. That sense of care and permanence, of having a space that was yours, a place that carried your memories, stayed with me long after I moved out. When I bought my own house 5 years ago, it wasn't just a financial investment. It was a piece of my identity, a tangible proof that I had built something lasting with my own hands. I worked as a graphic designer, a job that allowed me flexibility but demanded focus. I prided myself on being reliable, organized, and conscientious, whether it was with clients or friends. My life wasn't flashy, but it was steady and meaningful. I collected little things that reminded me of milestones, a postcard from a trip to Italy, a handwritten note from a client who thanked me for turning their dream into reality, a small ceramic owl I bought when I finally finished a year-long project. Each object had a story, a memory, and the house itself held them all like a quiet living scrapbook. I could walk through my living room and remember each moment, the night I finally hung the framed graduation photo, the afternoon I repainted the walls a soft cream after a particularly stressful week, the winter evening I hosted a dinner where my friends laughed until tears ran down their faces. My home was my heart. Then there was him, Mark. He wasn't family, not really, but he had been in my life for years. We met through mutual friends at a gallery opening, and there was an immediate connection, the kind that feels effortless, like you've known someone forever. Over time, he became my confidant, the person I turned to when I needed advice, encouragement, or just someone to sit in comfortable silence with. We shared dinners, vacations, and the occasional weekend project. I trusted him with things I wouldn't tell anyone else. Financial troubles I had in my early 20s, fears about failing in my career, even secrets about my family. I lent him money when he was struggling, never once keeping track, because I believed in reciprocity and honesty. He was always so charming, so thoughtful. At least that's what I thought. There were little moments that made him feel like he belonged in my home. The first time he used my kitchen to cook me breakfast, I laughed at his messy approach, but the sincerity in his eyes made me forgive every spilled egg. He insisted on helping me clean, rearrange furniture, even picking out small decorative touches I never would have considered. I remember the day he helped me hang a series of framed photographs above my fireplace. He held the level while I hammered the nails, and we both ended up laughing because nothing was perfectly straight. Those were the memories I clung to, the evidence that he wasn't just a visitor in my life, that he was part of my story. Of course, the house itself held symbolism that was hard to explain to anyone else. The brass key I carried in my pocket wasn't just a key, it was a symbol of trust, a physical representation of ownership, responsibility, and care. The small letters I kept in a wooden box on the shelf were reminders of my past achievements and relationships, tangible proof that I had built a life worth remembering. There were photos of me with my parents, with friends, even snapshots of Mark himself, smiling and casual, the kind of pictures that made your chest warm when you looked at them. I displayed them carefully, intentionally, so that walking through my home was like reading a journal in 3 dimensions. But even in those years of shared laughter and mutual trust, there were small cracks, the tiniest signs that not everything was as solid as I believed. Mark sometimes made jokes that hinted at entitlement comments about how my house felt like his, or how he wished I could loan him something else. He had this way of evading questions about money or plans, and I brushed it off, thinking it was just nervousness or charm. There were nights when he said he was too busy to come over, and I noticed the tone in his voice, just a flicker of impatience or irritation, but I told myself I was reading too much into it. After all, who would suspect betrayal from someone who had shared so many meaningful moments in your life? The tension between my trust and the little warning signs built slowly. I remember the first minor disagreement. He wanted to borrow a tool from my garage, and I hesitated, feeling that familiar tug of uncertainty. He laughed it off, made a joke about how paranoid I was, and I let it slide. Another time, he casually mentioned a project he was involved in that required temporary use of my home, and the unease I felt in my chest stayed with me for days. Still, I ignored it, because ignoring it felt safer than admitting the possibility that I had misjudged him. As much as I tried to focus on the positive, my heart knew the stakes. My house wasn't just walls and furniture, it was the culmination of years of work, dreams, and emotional investment. Losing control of it, or even having it treated carelessly, felt like a personal violation. It was the place where I celebrated my victories, nursed my wounds, and created memories with people I loved. It was the embodiment of who I had become, and allowing someone to enter that sacred space without respect was like letting a stranger into the deepest parts of my soul. So when I first handed Mark the keys, I believed in the goodness I had always seen in him, even as the unease in my chest whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was being naive. The house, with all its symbols, letters, photos, and memories, became a silent witness to my trust and, unknowingly, to the betrayal that would shake everything I had worked so hard to build. It started innocently enough, or at least I thought it did. I had asked Mark for a simple favor, to pick up a few packages from my home while I was stuck at work. Nothing big, nothing that required more than a few minutes. I handed him the brass key, the one I had kept on a delicate chain around my neck for years, a key that had opened my door to every memory and milestone of my adult life. I trusted him. I had to. By the time I arrived home that evening, the air in my living room already felt different, heavy in a way I couldn't name. The front door was ajar. My heart thudded as I stepped inside, expecting maybe a stray note or an innocent mess. Instead, I found chaos. Furniture shifted, drawers open, and the small wooden box where I kept my letters was gone. Photos were ripped from the walls, some scattered across the floor. And the deed to my house, the physical proof of everything I had built, sat on the dining table, but not as I had left it. It had been signed over, notarized in a way that made my stomach drop and my hands shake. Mark was standing in the middle of my living room, a casual smile plastered on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Ollie," he said, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of this nightmare. "I thought I'd take care of a few things for you." His voice was calm, but every word felt like a blade slicing through years of trust. I stared at him, disbelief making me mute. My mind raced, refusing to comprehend the reality in front of me, the person I had trusted, the person who had laughed with me over spilled paint and crooked picture frames, had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "You, what did you do?" My voice was steady, betraying none of the fury bubbling inside me. I tried to make eye contact, tried to find a trace of honesty or guilt, but all I found was that same smirk I should have recognized years ago. He shrugged casually, as if the answer were self-evident. I figured it was time to take matters into my own hands. "You're never home, so why not let me manage things?" My chest tightened. Every breath felt like it was being squeezed out of me. That key in my hand, the brass key I had once held with pride, suddenly felt like a weapon I couldn't use, a weight of betrayal that anchored me to the floor. The reality was undeniable. This wasn't a joke, a misunderstanding, or a harmless overstep. This was deliberate. He had taken control of my home, my life, in a single, shocking move. I walked slowly toward the table, staring at the deed, tracing the signature that bore my name, my trust, like a scar. The legal implications hit me immediately. If he had access to this document, if it had been processed without my knowledge, I could lose not just my home, but my security, the very foundation of everything I had built. My stomach churned at the thought of calling a lawyer, of navigating paperwork, of proving a betrayal that felt impossible to quantify. I tried to contain myself, to act with the dignity I had always prided myself on, but anger laced every thought. How could someone I cared about, someone I had trusted implicitly, weaponize my kindness against me? The letters I had kept, the photos, the small mementos that filled my home. They weren't just sentimental, they were markers of my life, my effort, my memories. And now they were pawns in someone else's game. I noticed something else, a small, nearly invisible tear in one of the photos of my parents. It wasn't just about the deed or the legalities. This was personal. The objects I had cherished, the symbols of my life, were being desecrated. It was a warning, subtle yet loud, that he was willing to go further, to manipulate and destroy anything that represented my independence or control. I stepped back, breathing hard, hands trembling around the key. I realized in that instant that I couldn't rely on anger alone. I had to understand what he had done, why he had done it, and how far he was willing to go. The tension in the room was suffocating. My sanctuary had been violated, my trust weaponized, and the first stage of a conflict I hadn't asked for had begun. I didn't cry, at least not yet. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there clutching the key, looking from the torn photo to the signed deed, feeling the sting of betrayal and the sudden clarity of what needed to happen next. This was no longer about friendship, about trust, or about loyalty. This was about survival, about reclaiming what was mine, about proving that no one, no matter how close, had the right to take me, my home, or my dignity for granted. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with the brass key heavy in my hand, a constant reminder that nothing in my life was safe anymore. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I couldn't sit idly by. I had to understand exactly what Mark had done and why. My mind raced with questions, each one angrier than the last. How long had he planned this? Who else knew? And, most importantly, how could he believe he had the right to just take over my home? I started quietly, cautiously. First, I checked every document I could get my hands on. I went through my files, my emails, any correspondence that could shed light on whether Mark had tampered with anything. I found discrepancies immediately. A few digital signatures on papers I didn't recognize, vague mentions of authorizations I never approved, and emails sent from addresses that seemed suspiciously close to mine. Each discovery was a punch to the gut. It was one thing to feel betrayed. It was another to see proof that the person you trusted had actively deceived you. Next, I reached out to neighbors, trying to keep my voice calm, casual. "Have you seen Mark around the house recently?" I asked Mrs. Prue. Carter next door, smiling politely, even as my stomach churned. She hesitated. "Well, he has been coming and going more than usual," she said carefully. "But I didn't think much of it, he seemed friendly enough." The way she avoided my gaze made me suspicious. I scribbled down notes, every glance, every pause, every hesitation feeding the growing sense that this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment act. I started tracking his behavior in subtle ways. I noted the times he appeared, the excuses he made for needing access to my home, the way he would deflect questions or change the topic. Each small lie, each misleading statement was like a breadcrumb trail leading me closer to the truth. One afternoon, I confronted him directly while pretending to be casual. "So, you've been busy at my place," I said lightly, tilting my head. His smile was smooth, practiced. "Oh, just tidying up a bit, making sure everything's okay," he said, avoiding my eyes. The words didn't match his tone, and my chest tightened. That tone, the arrogance, the casual assumption that I would believe him, was becoming painfully familiar. Suspicion gnawed at me constantly. I couldn't shake the feeling that greed and control were driving him. He wasn't just acting opportunistically. He seemed to believe he had some entitlement, a right to take over what was mine. I replayed our past conversations, noting moments I had dismissed as jokes or harmless comments. They weren't harmless. The subtle arrogance, the possessive undertones, they all pointed to a plan carefully executed over time. One evening, I returned to my home, determined to look for anything I had missed. The place still felt wrong, like an echo of what it had been. That's when I noticed something on the floor near the fireplace, a small photo, partially torn, pushed under the rug. I picked it up carefully. It was one of the first pictures I had framed when I moved in, a snapshot of my family during my graduation, but someone had scrawled initials in the corner, barely noticeable. My heart sank as I realized it matched a series of letters I had received from Mark years ago, letters I had kept in the wooden box. This was no accident. It was a message, a silent declaration that he had been thinking about this betrayal long before I suspected. I held the photo tightly in my hand, feeling both fury and determination. Every object in my home had meaning, every small memento a story, and now each story had been violated. Yet the more I pieced things together, the more clarity I gained. This wasn't a single misstep. This was a carefully orchestrated plan, a test of boundaries that he had decided to cross. My anger fueled me, but so did my disbelief. How could someone manipulate friendship, loyalty, and trust to this extent? And yet, here I was, forced to acknowledge the truth. I began documenting everything. Notes in a small notebook, photographs of altered documents, timestamps of conversations, recordings of evasive phone calls. Each piece of evidence was a weapon, a tool I could use to confront him, but also a shield to protect myself against further manipulation. I didn't yet know exactly how I would use it, but I understood that knowledge equaled power, and for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt a flicker of control. There were moments when my hands shook with rage, when I slammed drawers shut in frustration or muttered under my breath. But I reminded myself that acting impulsively would only play into his hands. I had to be strategic. I had to think 3 steps ahead. My inner voice kept repeating one truth: he underestimated me. He thought arrogance and charm could mask deceit, but I wasn't naive anymore. One afternoon, I caught him trying to remove something from my mailbox. "Mark," I said firmly, voice steady, "what are you doing?" He froze, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, then smoothly smiled. "Just checking the mail, Ollie. You're overreacting." But I had seen the letter in his hand. I knew it wasn't mine. I let him go, silently, making a mental note of the incident. Every lie, every small confrontation, every misleading statement he gave was now evidence in my mind, pieces of a puzzle that I was slowly but surely assembling. By the end of the week, my investigation had painted a clear picture. Mark wasn't acting out of need, or desperation, or even friendship. He was acting out of greed, control, and entitlement. Every smile, every favor, every moment of seeming loyalty had been a carefully constructed facade. And yet, I still had a choice. I could act now in anger, or I could wait, gather evidence, and ensure that when I confronted him, there would be no question of the truth. Clutching the torn photo and holding the brass key in my hand, I realized the stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just about property or legal rights. It was about dignity, trust, and the sanctity of everything I had built. And for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt a burning certainty. I would reclaim what was mine, and I would do it on my terms. I thought I had a clear picture of what Mark was doing, but the truth I uncovered next left me reeling in ways I hadn't expected. One evening, while reviewing the documents I had collected, I noticed something peculiar, a series of transfers, minor at first glance, that led to an account I didn't recognize. It wasn't just about the deed anymore. There was money, property management, and unauthorized decisions being made in my name. My heart raced as I realized this was bigger than I had imagined. He hadn't just taken control of my home, he had been siphoning resources, quietly redirecting my investments, and preparing for a permanent takeover. I remember dropping into the living room chair, hands clutching the brass key, the weight of betrayal anchoring me. It felt impossible, unbelievable, like the floor had been pulled out from beneath me. My mind spun through every interaction, every favor, every smile he had offered over the years. Moments I had thought were genuine now appeared staged, rehearsed, carefully calculated to build my trust. Relief flickered briefly as I finally understood part of his plan, but it was swiftly replaced by a burning, gnawing rage. He hadn't stumbled into this by chance. He had been strategizing for months, maybe years. Determined to confront him, I called Mark, attempting calm in my voice, hoping to catch him off guard. "Mark, we need to talk about the accounts and the house," I said evenly. His tone was casual, deceptively light. "Everything's fine, Ollie. You're imagining things. Just don't worry about it." My stomach turned. He was covering his tracks, pretending ignorance, twisting facts so convincingly that anyone else might have believed him. It was a minor setback, but an important one. I realized that in order to confront him effectively, I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. I retraced my steps through the house, checking every nook, every storage box, every cabinet. That's when I found it, a small envelope hidden behind the stack of letters I had thought destroyed. Inside were receipts, scribbled notes, and a bank statement linking him directly to the transactions. It was sloppy, almost careless, but it was enough. The handwriting on the notes was unmistakable. The account numbers matched those I had seen in my online records. Holding the envelope, I felt the weight of clarity press down on me. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw things, to demand answers immediately, but I forced myself to breathe. Rage could wait. Precision could not. As I pieced it together, a subtle pattern emerged. The money he had moved, the way he had manipulated my trust, even the timing of his visits. They weren't random. He had been preparing a permanent claim over my life, eroding my independence without me noticing. The clever part, the part that made my stomach churn, was that he had built plausible deniability into every action. A phone call here, a signature there, a casual joke to distract me from noticing the patterns. He had crafted a labyrinth of deceit that required careful navigation to expose. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for his cunning, if only because it made the betrayal sting sharper. To think that I had laughed at his jokes, shared dinners, and confided in him, never suspecting that the very man I trusted was methodically undermining me. It was staggering. My hands shook as I held the envelope close, the brass key cold against my fingers, and I realized that I now held the first pieces of the puzzle that could bring him down. Yet even as clarity settled in, another wave of unease crept in. If this was only a partial view, what else might he have hidden? Every document I found answered questions, but it also hinted at deeper secrets. There were gaps, missing receipts, transactions with vague descriptions, and one particularly confusing wire transfer that didn't match any known account. The thought that there might be more, something larger, more audacious, gnawed at me. This mini reveal, this first glimpse into the extent of his scheme, was both a victory and a warning. I set the envelope on the table, staring at it while my mind worked through the implications. I realized that my next moves had to be careful, deliberate. Mark was clever, and he would do everything in his power to mislead me, delay me, or even turn situations against me. Yet, holding that envelope, feeling the weight of both betrayal and evidence in my hands, I also felt a flicker of empowerment. I now had the knowledge to challenge him, to expose him, to reclaim what was mine. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The bigger reveal, the final twist, the truth that would completely upend everything. I could feel it lurking just ahead, like a shadow stretching across my path. The storm was coming, and I had no intention of being caught off guard again. The day I decided to confront Mark, I felt the brass key heavy in my hand, a symbol of everything he had tried to take from me. I walked into my living room, envelope of evidence tucked under my arm, and saw him sitting on the couch, pretending to read a magazine. His casual posture made my blood boil. He had no idea how carefully I had pieced everything together, how much I had learned in the past week. "Mark," I said, voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what you've done with my house and my accounts." He looked up, feigning surprise, that practiced smirk creeping onto his face. "Ollie, you're being dramatic. I've only been helping." His words were smooth, but I could see the tension in his eyes, the faint tremor in his hands. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it toward him. "Helping? Is that what you call signing over the deed without my consent? Diverting funds? Destroying my personal belongings?" My voice was controlled, but the rage simmering beneath it made my chest feel tight. He leaned back, still smiling, but it was weaker now. I thought you'd appreciate it, he stammered, trying to maintain control. You're always busy, so I was just making things easier for you. His excuse sounded hollow even to my ears. The arrogance in assuming he could decide what was easier for me ignited something primal. I grabbed the brass key, holding it tightly in my hand like a lifeline, a reminder that I still had control over at least one thing in this situation. Mark, do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't about being busy. This is about trust, respect, and boundaries, all of which you've completely ignored. He tried to laugh it off. Boundaries? You're making a big deal out of nothing. But the small beads of sweat forming at his hairline betrayed him. I could see the desperation masked under his arrogance, a subtle hint that he had overplayed his hand. Friends and family had already started noticing my stress. My sister called the night before, asking if everything was okay. I tried to sound casual, but I couldn't hide the tension. It's fine, I had said, just some issues with Mark, nothing serious. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't nothing. This betrayal wasn't confined to documents or transactions. It had seeped into my social world, making me question who I could trust and how easily people could manipulate appearances. I paced the room, keeping my voice steady but deliberate. Look at these letters, Mark. Look at the receipts and transfers. This isn't helping, it's theft. And I won't stand for it. He shifted in his seat, suddenly defensive. Ollie, you don't understand. I had to protect us, protect the house. His words trailed off, the desperation more evident now. I held up the torn photo of my parents' graduation, the one I had found hidden behind the letters. Protect? You even desecrated this. You used my memories, my life, as leverage for your own gain. How is that protection? My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't break. The photo was more than paper. It was the embodiment of my life, my history, and I wasn't letting it be weaponized against me. He leaned forward, trying to reach for the envelope, but I pulled it back. Don't touch that, I warned. Everything you've done is documented. Every lie, every transaction, every excuse. It's all here. The weight of my words hit him. I could see the arrogance in his eyes beginning to crack, a flicker of fear creeping in. I thought about my strategy, about the moral reasoning that had guided me through this week. I wasn't going to let anger dictate my actions. I needed precision. I had to confront him with facts, not just emotion. I had to expose the truth without giving him an opportunity to manipulate it further. Every step, every word was calculated to show him that his attempts at control had failed. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the walls seemed to close in as we stared at each other, the brass key and torn photo serving as silent witnesses. I could feel the years of trust I had invested in him, now weaponized against me, and I refused to let it continue. My hands shook, but my resolve was ironclad. I've given you every chance to do the right thing, I said finally. But this stops now. You will reverse everything. You will return what belongs to me, and you will face the consequences if you don't. The anger in my voice was matched by a quiet certainty. I wasn't just reclaiming my house, I was reclaiming my dignity. He hesitated, caught between arrogance and desperation. Ollie, please, he began, but I cut him off. No, Mark. Please isn't enough. Evidence isn't a negotiation. It's the truth. And you need to understand that every action has consequences. For a moment, silence filled the room. The tension was unbearable. I could feel the anticipation building, knowing that this confrontation was only part of a larger storm. The subtle hints I had noticed in his behavior, the small lies, the manipulations, the casual assumptions of entitlement, were all leading to a climax I could almost see coming. I gathered the letters and photos, placing them carefully in a neat stack, my hands trembling slightly with both anger and determination. The brass key glinted in my hand, a symbol of control I still possessed. I realized that while I had gained clarity, the path forward was still uncertain. He might try to manipulate further, cover tracks, or twist reality to his advantage. But I had prepared for this. I had evidence, witnesses, and a resolve that could not be shaken. As I watched him slouch in the couch, his eyes darting nervously, I knew one thing for certain: the next steps would test both our limits. His arrogance would either be his downfall or his last desperate attempt to regain control. And I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation arrived with a quiet heaviness. I had spent hours preparing, organizing every piece of evidence, rehearsing what I would say, and anticipating his excuses. The brass key was heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of what was mine, what had been taken, and what I intended to reclaim. I could feel my pulse in my temples as I approached the house, knowing that today would either cement my victory or test my limits like never before. Mark was waiting in the living room, looking unusually tense. The casual arrogance I had grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by a faint tremor in his hands and a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Ollie," he said, voice forced, "I didn't think it would come to this." I ignored the feeble attempt at charm, stepping closer, my eyes locked on his. "I brought everything," I said firmly, placing the envelope of letters, bank statements, and receipts on the coffee table. I pulled out the torn photo, holding it up between us. "This is your work, Mark. Every transfer, every document, every lie, it's all here. Do you understand now what you've done?" He swallowed hard, glancing at the evidence as if seeing it for the first time, though I knew better. "Ollie, you're overreacting," he began, but his voice lacked conviction. I could feel the shift, the subtle panic creeping into his posture. He was being cornered, forced to face the undeniable truth he had tried to manipulate for so long. "I didn't relent. I trusted you. I let you into my home, my life, and you took it for granted. You thought you could play with my trust, my dignity, and my property, and that no one would notice. But I noticed, and now everyone will." At that, he made a move, reaching for the papers. I pressed the brass key against the stack, stopping him. "Hands off," I warned. "Every action you took is documented. Every word you've lied about is here. You can either come clean now or face the consequences later." The tension in the room was suffocating. Every heartbeat felt like a drum, every breath a countdown to the reckoning. Mark shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the window as if looking for an escape, then back at me. I saw it, the faint, almost imperceptible quiver of desperation. He realized, finally, that arrogance had blinded him to the fact that I was prepared, that I had gathered proof, that I was not alone in witnessing his deception. Okay, he stammered, voice shaky. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought." He stopped, as if searching for an excuse that could undo months of scheming. "I thought you'd understand. You're always so busy, so I—" "Stop," I said, cutting him off sharply. "Stop lying to me. Stop pretending that this was some act of kindness or protection. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every favor, every smile, every casual comment was calculated to manipulate me. And now, finally, you are being held accountable." He sank back into the couch, face pale, hands trembling. I could see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. His eyes darted around, trying to find a lifeline, some justification, but there was none. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, amplifying the weight of the moment. I picked up the deed, holding it out between us. "This," I said, voice steady but full of authority, "is not just paper. It represents my life, my effort, my choices, and you tried to steal it. You thought I would be powerless, but you underestimated me." I let the document rest on the coffee table, letting the significance of it sink in. Mark's lips trembled. "Ollie, please." "I can fix this. I can." "You can't," I interrupted. "Because it's not about fixing. It's about facing the consequences of your actions. You betrayed me, my trust, my home, and now everyone will see it." I had already contacted the lawyer, prepared statements, and documented evidence, but I wanted him to understand the full weight of his choices before the legal system got involved. There was no hiding now, no smirk to cover arrogance, no charm to mask greed. Then the final twist emerged. The confession I had suspected but hadn't yet seen. Mark slumped forward, defeated. "I never thought it would go this far," he admitted, voice barely audible. "I just wanted control. I was tired of feeling small. of watching you succeed while I felt invisible. I thought if I had this, if I had the house, the money, I could finally be someone. I felt a chill run down my spine. Every word confirmed the deeper motive I had suspected. It wasn't about need or convenience. It was about ego, arrogance, and a desperate hunger for power. And now, it had unraveled before him. I remained calm, but the emotional weight pressed heavily on my chest. I had been hurt, humiliated, and manipulated, yet here I stood, regaining control piece by piece. I picked up the torn photo, showing it to him one last time. These aren't just objects, Mark. They're pieces of my life, and you thought you could erase them with lies and schemes. He hung his head. I deserve whatever comes next, he muttered, finally acknowledging the inevitable. The shift in power was complete. The arrogance that had driven him had become his undoing, and the desperation that he had tried to mask with charm and bravado now exposed him fully. I took a deep breath, holding the brass key tightly. You have no control here anymore. My house, my life, my choices, they're mine. You tried to take them, but now, the consequences are yours alone. The finality in my voice was undeniable. I felt a surge of empowerment, a reclaiming of the dignity that had been temporarily stripped away. By the time the lawyer arrived, the confrontation had already reached its peak. Mark was subdued, silent, resigned. He had confessed, indirectly, and the evidence I presented left no room for dispute. The legal process would formalize what had already been emotionally settled. His schemes were over, and I had regained not just my property, but my sense of self-worth. I walked through my home afterward, touching the brass key, straightening the letters, replacing the photos. Everything was back in its place, but more importantly, everything was under my control. The house felt alive again, filled with my memories and my choices, untouched by manipulation or greed. The confrontation had not only exposed the truth, but restored the balance that Mark had tried to disrupt. In that moment, I realized that dignity and preparation were the strongest weapons anyone could have. Arrogance and deceit, no matter how carefully orchestrated, always falter when faced with clarity, courage, and persistence. Holding the brass key, glancing at the deed, and seeing the torn photo restored, I finally felt whole again. Mark's downfall had been inevitable once the evidence and truth converged, and I had been the architect of that reckoning. I had not only reclaimed my house, but also my agency, my pride, and the right to define my life on my terms. And as I looked at him one last time, defeated, I understood that some betrayals, though painful, reveal your own strength in ways nothing else can. In the weeks that followed, the consequences for Mark were swift and unavoidable. The legal process moved faster than I anticipated, fueled by the meticulous evidence I had collected. The bank accounts he had tampered with were frozen, transactions reversed, and the deed to my house was officially reaffirmed in my name. His friends began noticing his sudden withdrawal from social circles. Word of his schemes spread quietly but effectively, tarnishing the carefully curated image he had relied on for years. Even those who had once admired his charm now looked at him with suspicion, and it was strangely satisfying to see him navigate the social and financial fallout he had so arrogantly ignored. For me, the relief was profound. I walked through my home with the brass key around my neck, feeling the weight in my hand not as a burden, but as a symbol of regained control. Every letter, every photograph, every small memento I had feared lost was restored to its place. The living room, once a scene of chaos and betrayal, now breathed again with the calm, warm energy that had defined it for years. I even replaced the torn photo of my parents, carefully framing it so that it could withstand future handling, a subtle reminder that what is treasured must also be protected. I reached out to friends and family who had noticed my stress, sharing the story in careful detail, grateful for their support and validation. My sister, who had called nightly to check on me, laughed and cried with me as I recounted the confrontations and discoveries. My parents, too, offered quiet words of pride, their presence a balm to the lingering sting of betrayal. There was an emotional clarity in reconnecting with those I trusted, a reinforcement of the values I had always held dear: honesty, integrity, and courage. Financially, the damage Mark had attempted was minimal in the long run. Reversals and corrections restored stability, but the real victory was in the symbolic restoration of agency. I had regained not just my house, but my sense of self. Every wall, every object, every carefully curated corner of my home now felt imbued with intentionality, a silent celebration of resilience and foresight. I even added a few small touches, a fresh coat of paint, new plants by the window, and a small shelf for the letters and photos that had nearly been stolen from me. These gestures, small though they were, reaffirmed that my space, like my life, was mine to define. Mark's attempts to manipulate my trust had ultimately backfired spectacularly. Social whispers, legal accountability, and the loss of credibility were subtle but enduring forms of poetic justice. While he had once tried to assert dominance through cunning and charm, the same traits became the tools of his undoing. There was no public spectacle, no dramatic confrontation beyond what I had orchestrated, but the quiet collapse of his schemes was satisfying in its inevitability. Every time I walked past the living room where the confrontation had occurred, I felt a sense of calm dominance. The brass key glinted in the sunlight, the letters lay neatly in their box, and the photographs smiled back at me as if the house itself was affirming my victory. Emotionally, I found myself reflecting on lessons I hadn't fully appreciated before. Trust, while precious, requires vigilance. Kindness should not be mistaken for weakness, and preparation is the most effective form of empowerment. I also realized that dignity isn't just about maintaining composure in the moment. It's about reclaiming what is rightfully yours after betrayal, asserting boundaries, and refusing to let manipulation define your life. Each decision I had made in the wake of Mark's deceit, collecting evidence, confronting him strategically, restoring my home, was a testament to these values, and the satisfaction that came with it was profound. One evening, I invited a few close friends over to celebrate the restored peace of my home. We laughed over wine and homemade food, reminiscing about small victories, past misadventures, and the resilience required to overcome challenges. It was a quiet victory, nothing grandiose, but it carried a weight far greater than any public recognition could. In the soft glow of the living room, surrounded by those I trusted, I felt the deepest sense of closure. The house wasn't just restored, it was revitalized. As for Mark, I didn't need to watch him fall further to appreciate the justice of the situation. The subtle unraveling of his social and financial credibility, the legal ramifications, and the loss of trust from those around him were consequences that would linger far longer than any temporary advantage he had hoped to gain. In a way, that silent suffering was the most poetic justice of all. No drama, no spectacle, just the quiet inevitability of truth prevailing. I closed the box of letters, set the deed back in its safe place, and held the brass key for a long moment, feeling the weight of lessons learned and dignity regained. My home was mine again, my memories intact, and my trust tempered but not broken. Every object, every corner, every small symbol now carried the imprint of resilience, a reminder that betrayal, no matter how profound, could never strip away what was built with care, intention, and honesty. Looking back on everything, I realize how much this experience taught me, not just about trust, but about resilience, dignity, and the importance of vigilance. I once believed that trust was a given, that people who smiled and shared moments with me would act in good faith. I was wrong. I learned the hard way that kindness and openness are valuable, but they must be balanced with awareness and careful boundaries. Betrayal isn't just painful, it's instructive. It shows you exactly who is capable of crossing lines and, more importantly, how strong you really are when faced with it. I grew through every stage of this ordeal. Emotionally, I discovered a well of patience and determination I didn't know existed. I learned how to manage anger, to turn fear and frustration into strategy, and to hold on to composure even when the world seemed to shift beneath me. Personally, I reclaimed not just my house, but my agency, my ability to make decisions, protect my life, and assert my dignity. Relationally, I became sharper at recognizing who truly deserves my trust and who doesn't. I nurtured the bonds that mattered, the people who supported me, and let go of the illusions that had blinded me to deception. I want you to hear this clearly. Betrayal can happen to anyone, at any time, and in ways you never anticipate. But it is not the end. It is a test of your strength, your integrity, and your ability to act with both intelligence and courage. Hold on to what matters, protect your values, and remember that evidence, patience, and dignity are often the most powerful tools in restoring balance. If this story resonates with you, I encourage you to share your own experiences in the comments. Tell me how you faced deception, how you protected what was yours, or how you learned to trust more wisely. Engage with each other, learn from each other's journeys. And if you want to hear more stories of courage, resilience, and the unexpected twists life throws at ordinary people, make sure to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to revealing the hidden layers of trust, betrayal, and triumph, and I promise there are more stories that will shock, inspire, and remind you of the strength within you. As I sit in my restored home now, the brass key warm in my hand, the letters and photos safely back in place, I feel hope. Hope for the future, for relationships built on honesty, and for moments of genuine connection that will never be manipulated. I am stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I am than ever before. And while the shadow of betrayal once loomed large, I can finally see that light. My life, my dignity, my home, shines brighter than any deception could ever dim.